Hello, everybody. Welcome to the TriStar Gym channel. Today is episode 200. I want to do something super special for you guys. Episode 200. Everybody's always asking me, Coach, what do you think about the ecological method? What do you think about it? I don't know much about it. I've heard a lot about it, but I don't know much about it. So, you know what, guys? I got you the man himself, the man who's been pioneering the movement here, Greg Souders. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to the 200th Ask Me Anything episode. How are you, my man?
I'm doing good, sir. How are you? And I appreciate you having me on, man.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure for me. A lot of my followers have been asking me to talk to you, get to know you, your methods and all that. So I'm so happy to do the 200th episode with you. Please, Greg, tell me, what's the ecological method? Like, if you had to define it for the guys who are not aware, who are not familiar with it, what's ecological method?
I guess I'll start from the beginning since I haven't spoken about this in a while. Uh, the ecological approach to skill acquisition is a view of how to acquire skill based on the understanding of the relationship between the individual, the task, and environment system. By system, we just mean individuals perform tasks in environment, and this relationship is what causes behavior to emerge. And that behavior is very sensitive to how these parts interact, and however these parts interact create behaviors in one way or another.
Okay,
Um,
so you're kind of like corralling them into learning something, right? Is that it? Instead
well,
of
yeah, it's
showing
like
them and demonstrating it exactly how it's done, you're kind of like creating a game or a task. You refer to as games or tasks?
well, either way. But I mean, showing, talking, these are all part. This is all part of the system. It's just what effect does showing and talking have on the individual learner, and how do these things affect the learning process overall?
Okay, so let's say you wanted to show armbar from the guard. Okay, you want them to learn armbar from the guard. Like somebody who doesn't understand the ecological method, we've never heard about it. Like, what would a class look like?
So basically, we would start with the experience we would need to have to start getting people doing arm locks. So typically, since we're showing a brand new behavior, something that imagine has never been seen before by that individual, we would define it for them. This is what an arm lock is. We would give them the idea. This is what it is, and then we would put them right in the situation and have them start performing tasks that allow them to build the skills to arm lock. So a typical example would be starting someone in the arm lock breaking position. Let's say from the closed guard, for example, we could put them all the way in it, like the point where you would finish, and we would give them tasks to perform. Typically, we start with tasks that are very low in variability, meaning there's not much change as people struggle. So putting someone in the arm lock breaking position and having them do something simple as staying attached to them with their legs and arms while the defending player tries to pull their arm free or try to get their head up. It can be different things. Is a nice way to start people learning using an ecological approach.
Okay, so you would maybe set them up in armbar. He has the arm in his hands. He's grabbing the wrist. He's in perfect position. And the guy on bottom, maybe he's trying to escape a little bit, and you're trying to isolate his arm and keep it tight and make sure he doesn't. Is that what we're like? You're kind of like doing a controlled spar?
For sure, for sure. I mean, the whole thing here is we want to use live resistance. Live resistance is important for grappling skill, but the problem with using live resistance is scalability. So introducing something like an arm lock to somebody, like in its whole form, like starting standing, putting someone in the proper position, getting all the way to the arm lock, that's scaled up too high. Beginners
Mhm.
can't do that. So we
Right.
scale it down, shrink it to a little portion of the game, and we have the beginner struggle over things that must happen in arm lock positioning with live resistance.
Okay, now there's an infinite amount of ways to get into armbar. Are you going to show him a step-by-step approach on how to get into armbar?
Well, think about what you just asked. You said there's an infinite way, but then you just said step by
Right.
step. So is it
Right.
infinite or is it step by step?
Well, I think I can show you one possibility of getting into armbar, and eventually you got to kind of like, connect the dots and see that there's unlimited amounts. But I like to show a particular way to get into armbar, a most common way, for instance. It doesn't mean it's the only way. It doesn't mean it's absolute, and it doesn't mean that you can't discover a different way, of course. But I find a lot of benefit in showing somebody a step-by-step approach, especially a very popular one. One that's used from white belt to black belt. That sequence is very common in jiu-jitsu here. That's how John Danaher he defines the basics, right? He says moves that work in white belt all the way to black belt at international level. Those are basic moves, meaning maneuvers that are most commonly used, most high percentage, if you want to put it that way. When we show you that, we're kind of like giving you a for instance of what armbar is, how it's possible to get into armbar. we don't want to become so rigid that we think that's the only way. No, of course not. But I feel that showing them the most popular ways or the most effective ways or the most tried and true, or it's a good start for them. Don't you find that it gives them a great benefit?
No, so there are two things there I think are important, and we can go in either direction, discuss either. So one, moves aren't basic and moves aren't fundamental. Uh, Basics, foundations, or fundamentals are not specific things; they're functional things uh, based on what's going on within that environment. So we could discuss that if you want. And the other thing would be the idea of rigidity. So rigidity is an outcome of how movement is taught. So if we want to avoid rigidity or people doing something in a specific way, we probably shouldn't start off by showing them something specific. The training interventions that we use to develop skill affect how the skill emerges. So if we have a rigid framework to develop a skill, then that skill will emerge as rigid. So step by step, very specific things. This causes rigidity.
Okay, so you're like, okay, so let's say I'm showing some, I want to teach somebody, I want them to get good at arm bars from the guard. Let's keep it that. Showing them so you don't do any drilling. You won't show them, okay, you grab the wrist, you grab behind the leg, you swing your hips in this way. You wouldn't show them a step by step.
No. Well, there is no step by step. This is just
Okay.
a mistake of, how we see skill, right? It's hard to see what causes what. So step by step is I don't know, the most, I guess, simple way that people look at things. But we need to look at skill in a more nuanced way than step by step. Because when you watch a grappling match, for example, you don't see steps.
Okay, well, okay, I understand that, but we can see, I mean, we could definitely see that all the judokas, all the freestyle wrestling clubs, all the great grappling clubs, they all teach fundamentals. And I know earlier you said there's no such thing as fundamentals. I like to circle back to that after. But they teach step by step approach. And, at a young age, they take these young athletes, they teach them a step by step approach. And then later on, yes, it culminates when they compete. They throw all that out the way because, now they don't need those training wheels anymore. But those training wheels still created a type of movement economy. Like, for instance, if you drill, let's say, arm drag all the time, it takes less conscious effort after to arm drag. If somebody reaches out to touch my shoulder or to push me, I'm going to arm drag without even thinking, right? I want to eliminate that conscious effort. I want to do something that's a reflex. Now, how do you develop that kind of reflex? Well, you drill that movement over and over again, right? So then you can do it in a very small window. The opportunity arises, the person extended their arm without even thinking, you grab that arm and you drag that person across your body and take his back kind of thing. Are you saying in your practice room, you don't do any type of repetitive movements to try to create some kind of muscle memory or like habit?
No, so repetition has a specific effect, and it doesn't have a very strong effect for skill acquisition. Um, Automaticity or muscle memory, these are not real things. These are just terms that are thrown around that aren't really seen in the skill acquisition literature. When people experiment and study which interventions cause which effects on the learner, these things aren't seen. These are just like how regular people talk about it.
Well, in neuroscience, it's an actual term, muscle memory, but they,
No,
they
it isn't.
don't they don't mean it's non-local. Muscle
No, no.
memory is not something. Hold on, Greg, if you don't mind me just saying, muscle memory. Okay, the muscle doesn't have a brain; it doesn't have a memory. That's a given, but they're going to explain it as it's not a literal term. What they're trying to say is that your synapses are rewired or they're insulated. If you do a certain movement, Charles Duhigg, he wrote a book called Habit. Actually, he talks about it quite extensively. He says, look, if I repeat something over and over again, my brain will literally rewire itself, rewire the synapses and reinforce the synapses through a better insulation to create a type of network that will facilitate that movement in the future. It'll make it easier for my body.
Yeah,
My body will do the same movement with less energy over time.
this isn't true. This is not seen. This
Really?
is
I'll
just
have to
things
send you a
people.
reference. I'm going to send you
Oh,
a
no, no,
reference.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying that he didn't say that, but I'm saying, of course, hopefully the man who wrote that book would have a more nuanced view, and maybe it's just a loose interpretation of what he said. But these things aren't seen. These things aren't real. I mean, muscle memory, for example, the only place that it is in literature is when people talk about hypertrophy. So, for example, the growing of muscles. There
Hmm.
seems to be a response at the cellular level where if, let's say, you grew to a certain muscular size over a certain period of time, and
Hmm.
then you lost all that muscular
Yeah.
size, you would
You're gaining it
gain it back
quicker.
in
Yeah.
half the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But as muscle memory relates to a neurological response to stimuli, this is not something that exists. So it's
Okay.
just
Well, I'm gonna have to send you some references after, because the thing is, I really do believe they don't mean it literally. The muscle doesn't have a brain in its own memory. What they're trying to say, I think, is that there's networks, neural networks, synapses that are rewired and insulated. And Charles Duhigg calls it as a loop. You have a cue, so you see the arm reaching out towards your shoulder, and then you've created this network in your this this network of synapses that have been triggered by the cue. So somebody reaching out to touch your shoulder, and you go into an arm drag. Now that arm drag, if you've repeated it more and more often, if you do it on a regular basis, you could do it quicker, faster, and with less energy. You don't agree to that? You don't
well,
think that's a
so your nerves respond to how you interact with the world. So
Mhm.
your entire mechanism is adaptive. It's not just, the bones and muscles and sinew that change. It's also your neurological system. So
Mhm.
these things happen whether we repeat the movement or not. So that's that. There's no direct correlation between how much you repeat a movement and its neurological robustness. Um, we would have to look at it again in a more nuanced way.
Really? I mean, I
So
mean,
yeah,
I'm sorry, sorry. Continue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. So the way we think about it is exposure to everything within the system. So what we think about is a grappler grappling and grappling environment. So a person doing different grappling tactics and all its variations against live resistance in a grappling environment changes your system to more readily adapt to that environment. So rather than being the one special movement that creates that one special, neurological synapse that responds automatically to stimuli, that's not really seen. Again, that's just things people say. Um,
So, can I ask you a question? Then, let's say I wanna learn double leg. Okay, pick
mhm.
any move you want. Is my double leg going to be stronger after I've repeated it 1,000 times, or
No.
after I've repeated it once versus 1,000 times? It's
Well,
equal.
no. It's just there's no such thing as a double leg. There is a double leg as a definable technique, but each time the person who prefers to grab two legs to take somebody down would be performed differently. Instead, what we do is there's a set of conditions that make the double leg available. And so
Hmm.
what a person who does a double leg does is they get sensitive to these opportunities for action. So by trying to grab two legs in a live environment while grappling, they get more sensitive to that information that allows that to happen. And as they do it, just like any other thing, we start to adapt to that thing we do. So it's more
So,
nuanced. It's
but
just not me shooting doubles that makes me better at it.
so I'm just saying in terms of mechanics. Okay, let's say I shoot a double leg. I lift you up over my shoulder and put you down. Right. Let's define it really loosely. I grab both legs. I lifted you off the ground. Whether I turn the corner or not, like the nuances, let's keep them to the side for now. I lift a guy off the ground and I put him down on the ground. Okay. Now let's say I have fighter A. Fighter A has only ever done it once. He's only ever gotten down on one knee, picked up somebody, and dumped them on their side one time in his entire training career. Fighter B, he's literally done it 1,000 times. Okay.
Okay,
Now
so
they're about to
mhm,
repeat the exercise again or the movement again let's say in a live match. Okay. I'm just giving a thought experiment.
yeah, yeah, no, I hear you.
When fighter A level changes and fighter B level changes, and fighter A shoots into the legs, fighter B shoots into the legs, isn't fighter B going to be doing it more efficiently, faster, with less energy because he's
Well,
repeated the exercise more often? Because
would you say repeat the exercise? Do you mean just like shooting doubles at a static partner, or do you mean
yeah,
like
yes, static partner. I'm talking about
so?
purely mechanics, pure
Okay,
mechanics. Yes,
so
not tactics.
let's imagine that nobody's done a live match before.
Okay,
Nobody's ever grappled, and you
right.
have one person that did a double leg in a static environment once, and you did
Yes,
another person that did it 1,000 times.
yes.
Now, what has changed between those two athletes is not an understanding of the double leg, because the double leg has been decoupled from the environment in which we would use it. So instead, what
Hmm.
we've done is we've trained two athletes to develop a capacity for grabbing and lifting. So if we have
Hmm.
one athlete that has a high capacity for grasping and lifting and another player that does not, it is probably more likely that the one who has been training just grasping and lifting as a physical capacity will probably perform that action better. But this doesn't mean they'll see the opportunity at the same time. It is highly likely that athlete A that's only done it once could be more sensitive to when things happen for one reason or another, and they could shoot a successful double. Where the one who's been statically drilling it 1,000 times, he may not get it. So
Okay, but
again,
if
it's more
all
nuanced.
things being equal, except one thing, one guy drilled it one guy didn't drill it. You agree that drilling it will give him some type of superiority and efficiency. Now,
Well,
what I want to ask you after that is, are you getting that element somewhere else, and that then we don't have to drill because you're getting it from somewhere else? Because I think we would both agree that there is an efficiency. The guy who's repeated the movement is going to get into the legs faster and using less energy, because
Well, no,
that's
because when the legs are available to grasp is not an understanding of the double itself, but how two bodies engage at a
right. That's
certain distance.
tactics. That's tactics. That's strategy, tactics.
Well,
When is the window open?
well,
Is
double
that
legs don't exist without an understanding of what you would say is strategy and tactics. So they all must be trained at the same time. So, for example, my ability to move what's in front of me out of the way to create an opportunity to grab legs is part of the skill of the double leg.
right?
It's not a separate thing.
But if the tactics are equal, because I'm just trying to isolate one variable. Let's say the tactics are equal,
So
hypothetically
both
speaking.
players know exactly all the hand
Yeah,
fighting, all the timing, how to
everything's
step in.
identical.
Yep.
Because what I want to know is there a benefit to repeating an action over and over again?
No.
Because I understand it's not absolute. You're saying no, because I'm quite surprised. I thought you would say yes.
No.
Because here's the thing. Here's the thing. In exercise science, there's the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demand.
Mhm.
If you use these muscles in this sequence, you will become more efficient at it. Doesn't matter the explanation how. We have countless examples of how these results. Do we understand how it works? You know, neurology, physiology is always going to improve. You know, it's never going to be perfect. We were always limited in our scope, but we know that if somebody does something over and over again, they can do it in the future more efficiently. So therefore, with more power and with spending less energy.
Sure. So let's talk about the specific adaptation to impose demand or the implied
Yes.
demand, right? So if we're talking about just grabbing legs and lifting a body and nothing else,
Mhm.
a person who does that more will be better at a person who does it less,
Okay. So,
generally speaking. But
okay.
the demand is not just grab legs and lift. The demand is get past
Correct.
the hands. The demand is
Correct.
step in. The demand is deal with fatigue. So what we have to understand is that we're not training a double leg. We're training to try to get to somebody's legs in a novel and variable environment, because that's what a open match is.
In the chaos, you're trying, just for the guys who are listening who might not be following as well. I want to be able to do this double leg in the chaos that the combat room, the combat sport provides. Correct? Is that what you're trying to say?
Correct. So
Right.
we train for novel environments. So
Mhm.
whatever interventions we use in the training room should create a change in the athlete that prepares them for the novelty of a live competitive match.
Okay.
So it's very important. So if we were just doing static drills, for example, it doesn't very well prepare us for novel and variable engagement, because
Right.
we're not adding that piece into the training. So
Right.
we're actually breaking the said principle. So if we respond to the imposed demand, and we're not imposing variation and novelty on the athlete, then we're not getting the skill to be specific. Do you
Mhm.
understand?
No, I totally understand. Drilling alone is limited.
Well, it's non-functional. It doesn't actually do anything.
Well,
So
that's the thing. That's how I like you to explain a little further, if you don't
for
mind.
sure.
If you don't mind,
No problem. So
because
if we're talking about
yeah.
static drilling, we're basically talking about lifting weight. So you're building capacity
Mhm.
at that point. And capacity to be, can I bend my knees? Can I grab? Can I lift? And again, this there's nothing wrong with this. If you want a static drill to, like, as a strength conditioning measure, so be it. But it's not, it doesn't directly transfer to an increase in skill.
Well, let's say fighter A, he's not drilling. Fighter B is drilling, right? They're equally good at reading the chaos.
Well, there's no, that's okay.
I'm
We'll
just
take
trying to
that.
say
Let's
there.
go. Yep, for sure.
All I'm trying to pinpoint is that okay, we have to build the ability to read through the chaos. Now,
Well,
what I'm
that is all
asking,
we're actually doing.
that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
So there's no okay. Well, there's a mechanical benefit in practicing the mechanics because if I double leg every day, I'm going to become more efficient at double
Not
legging.
true, because
But
mechanics change. So a mechanic is relative to the environment in which it's performed. So if the
Mhm.
environment is novel and variable, then the mechanics must be variable. So the mechanics have to match the demands of the task. So again, there's no such thing as an optimized mechanic as a static thing. Optimized mechanics are relative to any given day, any given situation, any given moment. So again, optimization is really adaptability. So being able to adapt to the changing environment effectively is what we're looking for.
Okay, so like, okay, run me through a typical practice just so we can maybe elaborate on this a little bit more. Like the students come in, class starts, let's say at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. or whatever it may be. What does it look like? If I was in the practice room, what would I be seeing?
Well, so it depends. We can talk about it generally, we can talk about it specifically, but generally how we run the practice room is we try to play as much of the game as possible. So the way I've historically divided the game is into three component parts. Standing, this is anything that happens on the feet. This is guarded, anything that happens in front of legs or using your legs. And then we have pins. This is anything past the legs, holding someone down to the mat, chest to back, top or bottom. So in a single hour, we try to expose athletes to as much of that as we can, scaled in such a way to meet the demands of the learner. So if a learner is relatively new, then it's those three situations, no matter how we orient them, are scaled down to what the learner would need. If they're a more advanced group, again, it would be scaled up relative
Okay,
to what they need.
what's your warm up look like then?
Well, we a low variability engagement. So whatever we start with, it's going to be low in change, and both athletes are going to start playing the game right away, but they're going to play it in a small, sectioned out portion, so the body can become prepared for higher levels of engagement.
Like, give me an example if you don't mind. Just like paint me a
Hand
picture.
fighting, a hand fight.
Hand
So
fighting. Okay.
anything where the body's moving around. It doesn't matter. Your body doesn't know the difference between jogging, rolling, doing push-ups, or shaking, standing in place, shaking violently. To your body, it's all the same thing. So I guess the concern when we first enter an environment is we don't want anything to surprise us. So we want something like that we can easily attune ourselves to get the whole process started.
Okay, so you would start with some hand fighting, standing up. That's why it's kind of safe, right? They're warming up, they're building heat. And in the hand fighting, are they going 100% or it's like 50% and it's kind of like,
Well, I
you
don't
know,
know. I
because
have no way. I have no way to measure that.
no, I understand there's not an objective measure. I understand that. But the guys know each other, there's a rapport. Like, do they start hand fighting? Are they going with their full effort?
I don't know. I don't know what that means. I don't even think they would know either if we asked. So full effort, if we were to say that, it would have to be a metric, and we would have to some way to objectively say that they are working at that rate. We have no way to know that. So we do have some historical ways that we know that we can control that, and I've talked about this before. We control it with tasks. So having a simplified task, like just keeping the hands off you, for example. It doesn't
Mhm.
require like intensity to perform effectively. We can use time. So long time intervals tend to drop the intensity because it's hard to sustain higher levels of
Mhm.
energy through longer periods of time. And then, of course, partner selection, understanding how the students interact with each other. Are they aggressive students? Do they have rapport with each other? All these things can affect the way two students engage. Like if I have a particularly aggressive student, I wouldn't want to put them with a passive student during a warm up, for example. That aggressive student might move too hard for the passive student, and that intensity could be too much for the athletes to handle.
Okay, but so there's a give and take, or there's no give and take. I'm trying my best to score on you, and I'm not gonna give you 1 inch. Or is there like a playful? I let the guy get the underhook, or is there like a give and take? Let's say I'm a black belt and I'm rolling with a blue belt, or I'm doing a
So
game with a blue belt.
again,
Do
that's
I
up to the
shut him
individual.
down? Do I
Well,
shut him
that's up to the
down?
individuals. However,
Oh,
they want to engage that day. That's not up to me. That's up to them.
okay, so
So typically, I design the game in such a way that the demands of the task are less intense. So, for example, fighting to get inside the elbows is not that intense, and both people
mhm.
have tons of opportunities to do it. Now, if I and again, partner selection is important. So, if I put a black belt with a blue belt, and that black belt doesn't like to lose, yeah, it might be pretty intense for that blue belt. So, if I wanted to lower the intensity for the blue belt, for example, I might switch partners.
So you're structuring it in a way that your intention of intensity doesn't matter. It's gonna be the rules are gonna dictate, how the practice goes, the rules of the game.
Well, it's the only thing that dictates it. A coach's words don't really do much. Like, even if I said to the room, like, okay, guys, go at 50%, everyone's 50% is different.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I
and so
got you.
rather than do that, we just give a low variability task demand, and we let the room organize however it does.
Okay, okay, but what do you say? Like, I mean, there's so much drilling going on in jiu-jitsu. There's so much, and all grappling arts. I mean, and are you telling me that there it's all a waste of time? Is that what
Correct.
we're saying?
Yeah,
Really, huh? That's
100%.
incredible.
Yeah, I know. I thought the same thing when I first discovered it too. It's an absolute
Uh,
waste of time. It's just hard to
really?
convince people because people have this psychological predisposition called path dependency. It's a cognitive bias. So we're dependent on the path that we think will get us somewhere or took us somewhere. And this is reinforced by colloquialisms being repeated over and over and over again. Authoritative figures saying things must be done this way. There's a lot that goes into why we drill, and increasing skill is the least of it.
Really?
Yes.
I love it, man. Listen, I'm a very skeptical guy. I have a philosophy background, so believe me, I'm all about the critical thinking. I love it. I really do. But here's the thing, if you don't mind me saying, I think I like a blend of the two. Okay. Because I don't call it games. We call it situation. We call it like positional sparring or
Yeah.
situation where the game is limited. Okay. We're starting with single leg, the first guy to improve his position. And my games are much more vague. When we do positional sparring, it's not that precise. So we start with a single leg. Maybe I get a guy down to his hips. I control him for 3 seconds. We try to always encourage them to control. You have to stabilize the guy underneath you for 3 seconds. He didn't scramble back up to his feet. You stabilize it. Okay, you've improved your position. Stop and start again. And now we're doing a lot of single leg because I have a lot of time with my leg in my partner's grips and he's trying to take me down. And we're spending a lot of time in that position. Okay, so we'll call it positional sparring or situation. But I'm a big believer in drilling, if you don't mind me saying, because the thing is, I find they both bring something to the table. Not one of them brings something perfect. They're both two pieces of a puzzle that need to be brought together. And the thing is, if you look at all the most successful trainers, Greg, if you don't mind me saying, they're all very heavy on drilling. Like for instance,
Yeah.
I trained with John Denahar for many years. I don't know if you ever got a chance to work with him.
I did
He's
a
the
couple times.
most systematic guy I've ever trained with. Like, obviously, he's a brilliant and very successful grappling coach, MMA coach, but he trained me and George St. Pierre for a very long time. He was a major part of George's success, and he was very systematic about the drilling, even to the point where, of course, as you got more experience, he'd be even more nuanced with the drilling. Your hand has to go here and not there. He was very adamant about precision. And you tell me that's really to you, this is nonsense?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's absolutely nonsense. I mean, because think about this, even the worst guys, even the worst coaches are doing tons of drilling. So
Right,
it's not
right.
has nothing to do with the drilling. I mean, see, we make this mistake. I mean, John Danner is a wonderfully intelligent man who I think has a very clear view of what's going on. But just because he does something, I mean, he probably, drinks coffee a specific way. So there's no reason to drink coffee like John Danner. You know what I mean? Like, so what he had you guys do was his best guess at what he thinks causes a change. And
Mm-hmm.
unless he's studied that specifically, he doesn't really know. He's probably doing a good job because he's been coaching for such a long time. And he's probably noticed there are some things that create changes in the athlete that he's trying to replicate. But I think, again, drilling is just a large, is a mistake,
Well,
or at least the way we do it anyway.
I mean, we're not going to call it a guess. It's his educated opinion. He's
But
not
based on
necessarily
what?
correct. He's not because he's noticed patterns and regularities in the past that led to success, and some certain patterns and regularities that led to failure.
So does our pattern recognition ever lead us wrong?
Yes, of course, it's not perfect.
So he's probably wrong.
Okay, but okay, so by that logic, when I'm driving on the highway, I shouldn't apply the brake because yesterday my brakes worked. Today they might not work. It might accelerate the car. There's a pattern and regularity that's reliable, has certain level of reliability. Correct? We can't just dismiss it completely. Do you
Well,
do you think?
you're only assuming that it was the drilling that had the effect. So again, it's just an assumption that this leads to that. That's all. And that's fine. I mean, we all had that assumption at one point, but again, there's an entire field of research that looks at what affects learners when they operate in one way or another. And this whole static drilling thing, we don't, and the literature that I study, they don't call it static drilling, they call it decoupling. So there's an idea that when we have a training intervention, we don't want to pull what we're doing out of the context in which in which we
I
perform.
understood. Yeah,
So static drilling is basically removing the athlete from the context in which they're moving, and this has a negative effect on skill acquisition.
because you're removing the chaos element
You're
of the
you're
fight,
you're
right?
you're removing the novelty,
You're
and
you're you're becoming Steven Seagal. Like Steven Seagal is he's just like he's doing something, but the guy's cooperating with him, right? You
yeah,
know what I mean? But
think about
yeah,
that. Like think about like drilling on somebody like hand trapping, for example.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
best hand trapper in the world couldn't stop Canelo from knocking their head
Right.
off.
No, of course, of course, of course.
Not at all.
I
Because
totally
again, no matter how much they train it, they'll never be able to prepare for his simple jab.
right. But here's the thing, Greg, if you don't mind me saying, Static drilling alone and never sparring, I agree with you, it'll lead us to delusion because it makes sense in my head that if a guy throws a punch at me, I'm just going to grab it like this and I'm going to twist his wrist and he's going to collapse to one knee and I'm going to be like, it's crazy. But we have to go out in the real world and try it after, right? There's a time where we go and we practice and we spar. And then sparring tells us what works and what did work and what didn't work, right? And then once we know what works and what didn't work, I can then show the next generation here, drill these moves because these are the mechanics that seem to be the most successful when we fight.
Well,
It
think
might not be
about
true tomorrow. It might not be true tomorrow, but today, as far as we know, the consensus is that these moves, the guys who did these moves, had a greater success rate.
well, think about how strange that is. And this, I've tried to bring this up a bunch when I've talked about this, and no one seems to. Everyone seems to miss this. The things you discover during live training, you then turn into a drill to give to the future generation. But you
Yes.
didn't drill to discover it. So isn't that interesting? The things that have impacted you the most,
Hmm. Hmm.
that you've learned on your own, come
Hmm.
from live training.
Hmm. Yeah, but
So
can I add to that if you don't mind?
sure.
If you look at jujitsu in the early days, if we look at the first like Elio Gracie videos, Carlson Gracie videos, they're not as good as we are today,
Oh, for sure.
right? There was an evolution, but
Yep.
in their time they were the best. Why? Because they knew a lot less than we know today, and we know more than them because, like Newton said, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. If they didn't lay the groundwork, we would be where they were today. Like if we started jiu-jitsu today, it wouldn't be as refined and sophisticated. Like I remember when I started jiu-jitsu, I knew armbar, triangle, omoplata, and that's all I needed. We would go to every tournament, we'd clean house. That's all. But you know what? We knew three moves more than everybody else because everybody was just. I was training with a Henzo Gracie purple belt, Angelo Exaracos. So we were really learning from the Gracies directly. And the guys we were competing in my area in Montreal, they were just learning from what they saw on TV, what they saw on UFC, or what they saw in a magazine. So they didn't know the nuances of armbar, triangle, omoplata. Now, if I remember exactly how we learned it, armbars have greatly evolved since when I first learned armbar. Okay, but because the the Gracies figured it out, they taught it to us in such a short period of time. The things that they figured out, they handed down to us, right? Now, our competitors in Montreal, my competitors in Montreal, they were trying to figure it out like the Gracies were back in the day. But because we had borrowed the knowledge from the Gracies, my trainer trained with Henzo, and Henzo passed it down to him, and he passed it down to me. We had a massive edge just by drilling the stuff that they discovered. Don't
Right.
you see a value there?
Well, it's not in the drilling. I mean, knowledge about historical knowledge is very, very important because historical knowledge kind of puts us in the driver's seat as to where we are right now. So the fact that I can go online and look up an arm lock is a great thing. This gives me a new perspective for what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
That there's nothing wrong with that. The
Okay.
issue is how do we take that new perspective? How do we take that vision of what's possible, and how do we create a training protocol around it? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about understanding what's happened historically. I think every coach in any field has to know their field historically because I think this gives them selective power when they decide to design training protocols. But again, it's how that training protocol that is designed that creates effective grapplers, right? So
I,
if I historically know that arm locks seem to work better with these few things in place, I just have to understand what those things are so that I can create training interventions that allow people to learn them.
look, I'll tell you something. I don't do a lot of drilling myself. Okay. And I say I'll tell you why, because I'm a black belt for many years and I know how to move my body. Like if I see somebody do an armbar, I've never done before, I've never tried. I saw it, I can go on the mat and just do it. Why? Because I've done so many arm bars, I've done so many drills that I know how to move my body. I understand what the guy did. It's very simple because I've seen other examples that are similar. But let's say I take a beginner. He doesn't even know how to move his hips. He doesn't know how to shift and
For
coordinate
sure.
his body. Don't
Yep.
you find drills to be very conducive to learning how to coordinate your body?
No, because there's no resistance. So the coordination pattern is relative to the resistance you receive when trying to enact it. So we could get someone to drill an arm lock perfectly. I could get someone to drill it perfectly. But the second I put them in the situation to perform it live, and I have, let's say, the the guy on top just stand up, it no longer works anymore. So the coordination pattern that we develop is very sensitive to the environment in which it's developed. So rather than build coordination in an athlete in a static environment, we build the coordination in the athlete in a resistant environment or an unscripted, uncooperative environment. But we have to know how to scale it. That's the problem. See, most coaches do not know how to scale practice. They go drilling, situational sparring, live sparring. They don't know how to put those three things together.
Okay, explain, because that's exactly what I do. I do drilling,
Right.
situations, and then sparring. But
Correct.
explain to me, how do you put it all together right away, right off the bat?
Okay, so we scale the position down. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, we take what we want them to learn and we shrink it to a small part of it. We focus on the things that don't ever change, and we give them zero sum tasks. So an example, this would be something like this. So defining the arm lock. So giving the end state, like what an arm lock is. We want to get people to work towards that end. So we start at the end. Now, in that end, we want to give someone lots of time there to use their body to solve a problem that they must solve. So staying attached or keeping the arm lock breaking position for a certain period of time will increase an athlete's ability to eventually break the arm. So the relationship here we're starting to get right away is the idea between time in position and time to break. So we need to develop the physical capacity to hold something for an extended period of time to increase our break mechanics or our understanding of mechanics. So when we put people in a situation, we let them experience it, and then we give each player a task that gives both players an opportunity to experience the thing they would need to experience to grow the skill. So for example, if I'm holding someone in an arm lock with my legs, I need to be able to keep them down and keep their arm. So we would have the defending player oppose that by trying to get their head up and pull their arm out. So both players right away are working on things they would need to work on to make either work, both on the offensive side and on the defensive side.
So are you
And
giving
so
them
again,
potential options for escape? Are you
not options
demonstrating?
for escape, we give them tasks. So for
Okay.
example, no matter what the escape looks like in an arm lock from, let's say, again, we're talking about an arm lock from the closed guard, bottom player has the arm lock breaking position, top
Okay.
player is bent over. No matter what the escape looks like, the top player is going to have to basically get their head up so they're not being held down, and they're going to have to free their arm in some capacity and some orientation. So we give them that general thing. And then the bottom player is going to need to try to keep the head down and keep attached to the shoulder so they can hang on to the arm at some capacity. So all successful arm locks have had to do those things. And so we have them battle over those general tasks that lead to more nuanced and specific tasks over time.
Okay, suppose you're doing this drill and you're doing it for many years and you discovered a really good way to stop somebody from armbarring you. You've discovered that, hey, if I have these three elements, if I move my arm at this particular angle, he cannot break my arm. Do you tell your students about it or do you create a game where they're going to discover it for themselves?
You create an opportunity where they can experience that thing that you've now discovered. So your perfect angle that's going to stop that break is going to be different than the other guy's perfect angle to stop the break. But within the two things between you guys, there's going to be something similar. So our goal is to find that similarity, or what we call invariance. There are things that are not going to change athlete to athlete, athlete to athlete, person to
Right.
person, moment to moment. And we focus our tasks around the invariant features and the invariant functions of how two bodies engage towards whatever end we give them.
Okay, but
And
I
then
mean, the laws of physics are all the same for all of us, right? That one thing that doesn't change, that one angle that will work, let's say for everybody. Are you making it a point not to verbalize it or not to point it out?
no, verbalizing is fine, but
Okay.
verbalizing does not have the effect that we think it does. Like telling somebody something does nothing to the system to help it understand what it needs to do, right? And I say the system is like your implicit response to the things that you pick up, right?
Explain that,
So,
what you mean.
okay, let's say I'm in an arm lock break position from the bottom, and you say this angle. Well, what is that angle? What does it feel like? Like when? Is it there all the
Well,
time? Do I think about it? Is Faraz's words the thing that gets me to do it? Like why, when, where?
the thing is, okay, an angle is an objective measure, right? If I tell you a
Mm,
90-degree angle, it's true for everybody, right? It's not relative anymore.
for sure, but you picked something that's very
No, what
obvious.
I'm just trying to say
90,
is, I
180, we know these. But
right.
even if we know them like intellectually, we don't experience the world like that when we move.
Okay. I understand there's a chaotic element, but let's say for instance, I don't know, let's say all my student has to do is let's say, tuck his elbow towards his hips. And if I know that if in this position right now he can't get armbarred in this particular situation, the stars are aligned, that all he has to do is move this one part of his body. Okay. I know that because I've been in this situation many times. I understand jujitsu, etc. Let's just say I have more experience than he does. Now he knows how to move his arm towards his navel. If I were to tell him that and he moved his arm towards his navel, do you think that would be wrong? Let's say he's in a match right now and there's a few seconds left, and this one piece of advice could stop him from having his arm extended.
So
Would you
words
not?
are a
Would you not
way.
do that?
Well, words are a way that we constrain the learner. So when I say something to somebody, I assume they hear what I'm saying. They're going to act upon that. I assume, right?
Right.
Some things we say are good for performance increases in the moment. So your example of in a competition, absolutely. If there's something I can say to make them
Mhm.
win right there that day, then and now, I'm going to do it.
Right.
But the question is me saying that thing going to cause that change to persist long term? Maybe not.
I think you're helping him. You're helping him discover it. Right.
Well, maybe he just listened to you. Maybe 2 days he forgot. 2 days later he forgot what you said.
Right. 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 That's
Or
why I.
maybe it changes. Maybe it changes. Maybe he finds something else that's stronger than what you said, so he starts going towards that instead.
Right. But there's some merit in giving advice. There's sometimes
Well,
it's
again, that's a
because
that's a
listen, I'm a full-time coach, and I can tell you, I've seen coaches lose fights for their fighter. I've seen it where they're constantly telling the guy, I call it puppeteering. You're trying to make the fighter, you're pulling in strings. You're sitting in the corner, he's fighting, and you're pulling strings, and you think that what you're saying is making everything right in there. I find that completely wrong. I totally agree. But I think there is a time and place where it does make a difference because
yeah. There's a
I,
time and place
I,
for
of,
everything.
I often tell my fighters, look, when you get in there, I'm gonna let you work. I tell them, I'm going to let you work. I'm going to encourage you. Like I'm going to be talking. I'm going to be encouraging you, but I'm not going to tell you stuff. I don't puppeteer. But however, there are times while I will interject. For instance, I'll give you a great for instance. Okay. If I see my fighter circling towards an opponent's favorite attack, let's say the opponent has a really good back kick and I know you're circling towards the back kick, I'll remind my fighter because in the chaos he's tired, he's been hit or whatnot. I'll remind him, hey, you're going in this direction. You gotta remember that because going in this direction unknowingly or if you forgot about, we've drilled it in the past, we've prepared, we're aware that he likes to throw this strike at this period of time. I'll remind him, and I always tell my fighters too, like whatever I tell you is just a suggestion. You're the one feeling the weight. You're the one feeling the intensity, the speed of the guy. You have to make the adjustments. What I'm doing is I'm reminding you of all the possibilities in our system. And I'm reminding you of what this guy does statistically or what he's been successful in the past, how he's operated in the past. Doesn't mean he's going to operate like that in the future. Of course not. But his tendencies, and I think that kind of coaching, I really do think makes a difference personally. And so many times I had a fighter come and tell me, oh, thank goodness you told me that because I totally forgot about this one variable. Because in the heat of battle, there's so much going on, right? We can't compute it all. And I find that the coach can always assist in extra bandwidth. He can act as extra bandwidth. But also, I've seen the opposite where fighters are overwhelmed by what their corner's telling them, and the corner's getting frustrated, and the guy's fighting somebody while listening to somebody yelling at him. And I find it creates like a chaos.
For sure. So words are an informational constraint that affect focus. So
Mhm.
understanding how the words we say to our athlete affect their focus as it affects both their during match performance and their in training focus for future levels of development is critical because it is a constraint. So we have to understand how to use it. So verbal cueing, verbal instruction, explicit instruction, this is all part of the ecological approach. But we have to understand it as a tool, as a constraint in and of itself. Just saying things, though it has an effect, sometimes doesn't have the intended one we're looking for.
Right.
So understanding that I think is important.
And I agree with you. Listen, I really agree with you. I agree with you very much that more instruction is not always better. It's not always better. I love to give the example of the Gracies. Okay. If you look at the Gracies, they quickly surpassed the Japanese. And I love the Japanese. I have a great admiration for the Japanese and the Chinese and their system of how disciplined they are. But what was the weakness of the Japanese system of grappling was that they couldn't question their masters. They're hyper traditional, the Japanese, and I can't tell you how much respect I have for the Japanese. I've been to Japan many times. I love the Japanese. I think they're an incredible people. However, they do have flaws, like all people have flaws. One thing is that they can be overly traditional. If your master showed you to do this way, and you think you're going to improve on it. Oh, are you saying you're greater than the master?
But-
It's
right.
offensive almost.
Right, sure, because that's a constraint. So
Right.
the way we view traditionality and the way we view our masters, for example, affect the way we search for information. If the way we search for information is affected by something external to what's actually being shown to us, we're going to have a performance, excuse me, we're going to have a change in performance outcomes.
But
So again, these
here's
constraints affect us.
but here's the thing: the Gracies benefited from instruction. Maeda, he went to Brazil. He was going to conduct business. He trained the Gracies, but sparingly. He only had a few dozen interactions with them. They say, okay, but he gave them enough discipline, but not too much, so they were able to experiment. They had the breathing room because if they were training in Japan, they would be only allowed to do what the Japanese do.
Real quick, let me just think of that's what you're just saying. So you're saying
What's that?
the Gracies with
Mhm.
limited interaction,
Yeah.
with limited information, without the traditionalism that got the Japanese as good as they were, without all those things that made the Japanese what they are at that current time, a different group with far less than what was offered over here with less, they got more. So if we need all this instruction, we need all this drilling, if we need all this perfection, how did the Gracies come up with a system that's superior to the Japanese when they did not have all those component parts that you say are necessary for a high level skill acquisition?
I would render it to two things. Okay, one, the Japanese didn't go live as much. They didn't roll as much. Okay, there's actually a whole history there where they didn't roll. There was a
So less
tournament,
live work.
less live work. That was a major flaw in their system. They barred a lot of moves because they thought it was too dangerous. Where the Brazilians were like, "Hey, everything's allowed." Okay, so that would say, actually, there would be three things. One, the Japanese barred a lot of moves. They barred it. They wouldn't allow, like leg locks was not allowed. Arm bars were not allowed. There's only a select few moves that were considered safe enough to do. They didn't go live, and they were drowned by traditionalism. You can't question the master,
It sounds like the exact thing I'm going through right now. So maybe I'll
right?
be the new I'll do for jiu-jitsu what the Gracies did.
Yeah, maybe, man. Listen, I would love to be a part of it as well. That's why I'm going to be trying your approach for sure. But listen, the thing is with Henzo and John. Okay, John was like, he probably, if I innovated something, he might make fun of me, but he wouldn't discourage me. He wouldn't discourage me. He would just show me. He would tell me like, show me it works on the mats. Like if I can get it to work on the mats at a high, with not with the white belts or the blue belts, but with the better guys, he'll adopt it. Like they were very open minded. Henzo like didn't care if you had some crazy idea about how to take somebody down or how to choke them. All he would care about is that you can actually do it in real
Right,
time. That's what he would care about.
for sure.
And if you could do it, he wouldn't be insulted. He would be like, "Oh, I just understood something new." Like they were much more open-minded in that sense. There wasn't that, "Hey, don't question us." However, if a white belt comes on the mat and he starts giving us his theories, now he's gonna get slapped. Like that wasn't the time and place. Once you get to purple belt, once you get to brown belt, of course, then you could start innovating and you could start thinking outside the box, really. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that earlier, but at the beginning, if you come in as a white belt, you're kind of trying to say, look, I can bypass all these years of cumulative information that's been passed down.
But who's saying that? I'm kind of confused.
Well,
Like,
what I'm saying is like, what I'm trying to say is that when somebody comes in the practice room, if they're a white belt, I think they should do the basics.
hmm,
Okay. Once they get to purple belt level, now you could start exploring techniques. Now you could start doing, somebody discovered the buggy choke. It doesn't have to be a black belt to discover a buggy choke.
I,
Because
I
they
think
would,
you're
sorry, go ahead.
I think you're confusing discovering new exploits with exploration and self-discovery. I think you're conflating
How
things.
are they different?
Well, so when we talk about using an ecological approach to develop skill by putting a new learner in the live environment, having them self-organize around specific task goals, we're not asking them to not do basics or not do fundamentals. Again, we have to redefine those terms because I
Yeah,
think
that's
the
that's
way
why
we,
that's why I'm asking you. Like, how do
yeah,
you go
yeah.
about it? Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, a new player has never grabbed a body and moved a body before. They've never done that.
Right.
So, they need to learn how to grab and move bodies, but we need to make sure that how they're grabbing and moving bodies leads to an increase in performance. So, what an increase in performance means for a day one guy is different than what an increase in performance means for a year 30 guy. You know what I mean? So, a new player might just have to do do something as simple as hold somebody down, not let them off their back,
Hmm.
or get underneath their elbows, or stay underneath their elbows. You know what I mean? Again,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
for them,
It's
that's what they're doing, which are
right, right. You're
fundamental
scaling
things
it to
that was
the his experience. You're scaling it to his experience.
correct.
Hmm.
So again, the ecological approach is not just do new shit and figure all these crazy new techniques. It's
Right.
you need to learn how to functionally grapple with this body relative to the demands of the game that we play. That's it. And so knowing how those relationships play out, know what causes things to happen in grappling is our job. And we put students in those spaces and we give them opportunities to go towards those things.
Okay, good. So now let's say again, don't take this any the wrong way. I'm just trying
Yeah,
to wrap my mind out
please.
how your approach is working. Let's say I'm side control, I'm on top. You taught me to get under the guy's elbows.
Mhm.
Okay. And you're telling me, look, keep this guy's elbows open and separate his knees from his chest. You know, you're giving me advice that you deem correct. And then the student, for some reason, takes his arm out and goes like into a headlock position. Would you tell him, hey, be careful, you can't, it's not a really a good idea because the guy can take your back?
No,
Or
we need to give them the experience. So we don't solve problems that our students are not yet having. So with new learners, we need to give them tasks and we need to have them play those tasks out. But we need the
Mhm.
bad stuff to happen too. We need the mistakes, we need the reversals, we need the counters. We need everything that's present in that environment that can happen to that individual safely, of course, happen to that individual. So if, for example, getting under elbows would cause them to get their head gripped and get turned over, that's very important because that's a new problem that new learner is going to have to solve now. So by getting back into that situation, they are now aware, hopefully, of a possibility. And then we can change their task focus to help them deal with that new thing they just experienced.
Okay, so if he reaches out from under the underhook, wraps around the neck, he's gonna get his back taken. He's gonna realize that that's a bad thing.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean,
So
but again, whatever the learner is facing relative to what we're trying to get them to do, if they encounter a novel problem, then we would just add that into the training focus, a focus to try to solve it.
can you give me an example? Like,
You just gave one. So,
okay,
for
so he
example, if
grabbed the
I'm under the
headlock. He,
elbows
yeah.
and he
Sorry.
grabs my head and tries to turn me over, maybe it's not just get under the elbows now. So maybe the top player, their job is to stay underneath their partner's elbows, and they have two tasks. So while staying under at least one elbow, we're trying to connect their elbow to their head, the bottom player's elbow to their head. If we're able to connect their elbow to their head, they win the game. The other way we can win the game is we can either connect their elbow to their head or put our chest on our partner's back. So now
Hmm.
when that bottom player tries to relieve themselves of getting their arm extended by turning,
Hmm.
that top player has an opportunity to recognize what's happening and go behind and create chest to back contact. So by giving them the tasks, they now explore that space to look for those outcomes. And it's in the searching that enhances their perception. And as they perceive these things happening, they have opportunities to act upon them, which will then enhance their ability to act in future experiences that are similar.
So you know there are nuances to holding somebody's arm to their head,
Sure.
transition to the back. Do you want them to discover those nuances, or do you point them out when you demonstrate it, or do you do no demonstration? Are you only
So
demonstrating the game?
again,
How do you develop nuances?
we're demonstrating the tasks that we're asking them to perform, so our students know both intellectually what their focus is and experientially what their focus is. So seeing it and hearing it reinforce the ability to focus on those things. So I don't need to show them a bunch of different stuff because that's extra information they now have to focus on. I
Mhm.
want to get them focusing on whatever information they need to perform the things we're asking them to perform. And we make it large enough that we allow for multiple outcomes to be considered a win in a given situation or
Mhm.
set of conditions. But they're all relative to what we need to do to play the game well. For example, hold someone down chest to chest and get under elbows, or go behind someone to create chest to back contact.
Wow. You know, I have one of my black belts that went up to train with you, and he really enjoyed it. Chris Alfar. He
Oh
really,
yeah,
really
yeah, for
enjoyed it.
sure.
Yeah, he really enjoyed his time. Thank you, by the way, for
Oh,
training
yeah,
with him.
how's his knee, man?
He's better. He's better. He's getting better. And you know, he was telling me he loved it, this and that. So I want to take a dive into your system, and I want to give it a try as well. And that's why I'm trying to wrap my mind on exactly how you do it. You know, so please don't take it like
I don't.
you know, I
Oh,
want
dude,
to.
I've done like fucking 30 podcasts at this
Have you?
point. Yeah. I mean, everyone's interested in this thing is because it's a new way to look at how we train, and it's removing something that people traditionally have done forever, which is drilling. And a lot of people can't understand how can we scale live practice without drilling. And it's a really interesting thing, and I've been working on it for 10 years. And DeAndre and Gavin, they always say that it's always hard to convey it over on podcasts, but
For
nobody who
sure.
comes here
Mhm.
leaves confused.
Yeah, you know, to all the listeners, believe me, I have two of my students who are very advanced. They went down to your place and they loved it. You know, they loved the experience. Maybe we're not doing it's not easy to explain wrestling with words, right? It's not a jiu-jitsu and grappling, but we're doing our best here to kind of like paint a picture, and I'm trying to understand the picture. But because the thing is, you know, we're so taught one way, right? We're taught one tradition, one way to do things, and then when it's time to do something completely different, you're going to get a lot of resistance. People are comfortable doing the things that they do. People believe in their tradition, etc. But I believe that you got to try it. You know, you got to test it. You got to try it. You got to measure, and then the proof is in the pudding. At the end, if we get better results, and there's a better way to get better results, I'm all for it. It doesn't matter what it is. There should be no prejudice. Results at the end is what matters most. So I'm going to be giving it a try for sure. But I definitely am I just see a lot of benefit in some drilling. I think ultimately there's a marriage between the two, drilling and tactics. Because I think the best warm up, personally, if you ask me, Greg, the best warm up is drilling. I don't do any running around. I don't do any shrimping up and down on the mat. No, no, no. I warm up with technique.
Yeah.
Why? Because I have to warm up with something, and moving my body in the exact ways I'm going to be doing when I'm competing or sparring or whatever is the correct muscles I want to warm up, and I'm getting more fluid by doing my maneuvers over and over again. I know you don't agree to that, but I think it creates a fluidity. It creates an instinctual movement. It creates a technical speed. Technical speed. Like all my great influences were all heavy drillers. That's why to me it's very surprising to hear somebody say, "No, drilling was just actually a whole, waste of time." So I love to hear that because it's so against the grain. But I want to ask you also, Greg, who are your influences? Who did you train with, and who are your great jiu-jitsu influences?
So Lloyd Irvin was my coach. So I
Hmm.
was with Lloyd. I was on Team Lloyd Irvin from 2004 until 2013, and I
Okay.
left the team in 2013 and went off on my own. I mean, the people who influenced me most were the people in my training room. I mean, I was lucky enough to be part of a big American, a strong American team.
Hmm.
Ryan Hall, Mike Fowler, Seth Smith, DJ Jackson,
Hmm.
Keenan Cornelius, Andres Brunovskis, Sajara Eubanks, Willie Leonard. I mean, you just name it, man. All the
Yeah.
guys who were heavy hitters in their mid 2000s were on the same team, uh, and they were my influences, man. Those are the guys I trained with every day. It was really nice being part of that movement and part of that crew, and I learned quite a bit.
Yeah, I train with Ryan Hall still to this day. I mean, I know him very, very well. I trained with him I prepped him for so many of his fights. I've trained with him for so long, but he's a systematic driller, that man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
That
mean,
man.
he and I came from the same environment, and so yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, try.
But you grew,
Oh,
you grew up with the drilling, though. You grew up with it.
oh yeah. Oh, for
Yeah,
sure. I
yeah.
mean,
So
we were big on. I mean, we had specific drilling practices and a way we were asked to do it and a way we were told to do it. And the thing about the type of drilling that we did is it helps develop conditioning. Like for example, we were doing the same movement pattern at high speeds over and over and over again, and there's some capacity change when we do that. So it can have benefit, I think, at the strength conditioning level, so to speak. But again, doesn't really have much to do with skill.
but like when you see those judokas repeating the uchimata like over, like they're just drilling it like they're doing a partial rep and they're just going like a computer, ta, 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 in and out, in and out. They're drilling that forward. In and out, you be like, hey man, tap them on the shoulder, be like, that's a waste of time. Is that what
Oh
you
yeah,
tell
I
them?
mean it's getting the heart rate really high. They're getting tired, and so yeah, that's cool. But it's the funniest thing to me about drilling. The funniest thing in the world that makes me giggle is you see drillers do all this nuanced, crazy shit, and then you watch their matches. It looks nothing like that. Like even the judokas who have these like beautiful like uchikomis, and then you watch them, do an uchimata or whatever they're going to do, whatever throw they've perfected, and it looks nothing like the way they were drilling it. It looks nothing like it, and it's
Right.
it's wild to me. And
They adapt,
nobody flinches.
but don't you think they adapted what they were drilling to the situation at hand? Because the situation at hand is It could be anything. It could be so many different variables, but he has a core movement that he can make fit in the situation at hand. Don't you think about it that
So
way?
there are a set of conditions that create effects. We adapt what we do to this interplay of the conditions that we create and the conditions our opponents create as we try to affect each other. And so adaptation is understanding how to read this exchange.
Hmm.
And so even though there is a movement pattern or a coordinated pattern of movement inside of that condition that creates an effect inside of that exchange, it's learned through the exchange itself. um, so it's really staying true to that. It's not that repetitive drilling that they then adapt to the situation. I mean, again, that's just not being done. You know what I mean? Because if that were the case, we would spend most of our time drilling, only a small portion of our time rolling. But it's the most effective teams actually do it the other way around. They spend the majority of their time doing live work and a minimum time drilling. So you see this, and again, it depends on the coach in the room and a bunch of other stuff, but you tend to see the more skilled players do far less drilling and much more sparring and situational sparring.
That is true, but I've also seen the opposite, Greg, to be honest with you, because I mean, I've seen fighters who are like, because I train a lot of MMA guys, okay?
Yeah.
And, at a certain point where they're matured in their career, they can't take any more sparring. They've broken their nose two, three times in their career. They've broken their hand three, four times in their career. They've busted up their shin three, four times in their career. They're like, hey, I know how to fight. I'm just gonna hit the pads. I'm just gonna do wrestling drills. I'm just gonna do grappling drills, and I'm ready for fight day. And I'll tell you something. I've seen guys do that, and I tell guys that it makes sense for certain fighters because their body is at the limit. They're not gonna take a busted rib again in sparring. They don't want it. They won't even spar. I had one fighter actually with this system win 10 fights in a row with just drilling. Why? Because I believe, like, if you look at the Thais, if you know I've trained a lot with the Thais. I used to go to Thailand every summer. They don't spar. Now, I believe they would be
When you
better at.
say spar, when they say don't spar, be specific.
Yeah, I'm gonna lay it out. Don't worry. So they don't spar like Western boxers. Western boxers, they glove up, they put on 16-ounce gloves, headgear, mouthpiece, and they go full out. It's a full fight, 100% real. You're hitting for real. If you knock your generally in boxing clubs, elite boxing clubs, if you mess a guy up, that's too bad for him. Like they're very rough in boxing gyms. In Thai boxing, they run, they jump rope, they shadow box, they hit the bag. If you're an elite fighter, you hit pads. Then after all that's done, they play spar. Okay, so no gloves. They kind of tip tap. They play spar. That's a smaller portion. That's like the cool down period, and that's it. Now the reason why they do it that way, if you don't mind me saying, Greg, is because they fight so often. They've been fighting since they're 8 years old, 10 years old. They literally have hundreds of fights. So for them, sparring makes no sense because they're literally fighting 3, 4 weeks from
Well,
now.
so they are sparring in the fighting. So they're doing the same
Yes,
thing as
yes,
Western
yes.
boxers are doing, but they
Right,
have other training interventions that help keep them healthy through all the fighting. So
right.
the thing is, it's the live work. No matter, but you have to scale it, right? So there's something called a limiting factor or rate limiters. So getting hit in the head can be either limiting factor or a rate limiter to how quickly
Say
or
that
how
again. I'm sorry. Did you say rate limiter?
rate limiter. It limits the rate at which we can acquire skill, or it limits our ability to acquire skill. Getting hit in the head is one of them. So a good friend of mine, Scott Sabright, is trying to create a constraints-led approach training around not getting hit in the head and developing mixed martial artists and Thai boxers and kickboxers. And so how much can we take out hitting the head, but still do play sparring and like live work and using other striking areas rather than the head? And how well does this transfer over into
Well, I
full
have a real
fights?
case study. If you don't want me sharing it with you, I have a real case study on that. George St. Pierre, he actually didn't do any head strikes because he came out of the karate background.
Yeah, yeah,
He did Kyokushin, where you can punch to the
yeah.
body, you can kick to the leg, you can actually kick to the face. Okay, but it's harder to kick somebody in the face. You're not gonna get hit to the head as often. And when you're younger, actually, no, they don't kick to the face. As you become more senior, they allow kicks to the head. So George came from a background
Yeah.
where there's a lot of striking, distance control, all the stuff you need, and they don't hit pads as a karate guys. They don't hit a lot of pads. They do a lot of like forms, like katas, and then they kind of do like a touch sparring or sparring that's to the body, so it's safe, right? They don't want these young kids getting hit in the head, and I do the same thing with my kids. Actually, I don't like them get hit in the head because their brains are still developing. Later on, when he became a professional fighter, we converted him to boxing. Now, because of his background in Kyokushin and hitting the body, he quickly adapted. Now, there was a time he wasn't comfortable getting hit in the head. It was very new to him. It was very new, but he quickly caught up now. He's a freak athlete. He's a, special, very special guy. But he did grow up with no blows to the head.
Well, Scott Savebright, his whole program is that. And he, like,
Hmm.
earlier this year, I don't know what number he's at now, but he had 16 amateur guys. They're all 16-0. They won all their
Hmm.
fights. I mean, he's having huge success. His Primal MMA is his school, and his amateur fighters are doing extremely well. They're all healthy. It's a very cohesive environment.
Hmm.
Everyone's sparring from day one. They're doing live
Right.
work from day one, but there's no head contact, so it makes it more approachable to the average consumer.
Hmm.
And so he's producing great skill, doing
Hmm.
nothing but live work. He doesn't do any pad work or anything. No shadow
Right.
boxing,
Right.
nothing.
The
But
Cubans
again,
don't do pad work. The Cubans don't do pad
yeah,
work. You'll never see a video of Muhammad Ali doing pad work. Pad work that was developed in the 70s. Like somebody put on Kenny Weldon claims he invented the mitts. He says he put on the pair of gloves backwards because he was trying to show one of his amateurs how to do his punches, and he wanted to stand in front of him. He put a pair of gloves on backwards, and he says that later on people copied him and created mitts. But you're right. In the golden era of boxing, there was no pad work. That's why I tell guys, like, don't obsess over pad work. It's not that important. It's really not that important. But I do emphasize shadow boxing. I do believe, Muhammad Ali was a big shadow boxer. But when you're shadow boxing, you're sparring in your head. And some people, they go out there and they just kind of punch, they move shadow boxing is not about moving your arms and legs only. That's part of it. When you're shadowboxing, you're supposed to be fighting in your head. Like there's an opponent in front of you. You're imagining it, of course. The person's coming towards you. He's throwing a combination, uppercut, right hand. You have to step in this direction. You have to shield in this. So they are like kind of like replaying a fight scenario in their head. There's a lot of that in striking. A lot of the greats did that. And there were guys like James Toney, for instance. He was many times world champion, never even hit the bag. He would just spar and run to lose weight. So his running was all about losing weight. The rest of his training was all sparring.
yeah.
Now
No, I
the
mean,
guy,
again, that makes sense to me. You know what I mean? And based on what the research that's being done, the experiments that are done about how important context is for skill acquisition, all bore this out. And again, I think that the big difficulty in applying a CLA or a constraints-led approach to any practice is understanding both scalability and the
what's CLA, Greg?
relationship.
Sorry. Just
Oh, I'm sorry. So an ecological approach is just a way that we look at skill through the lens of this idea called direct perception. When I can teach about that if you want, but
please.
CLA is the constraints-led approach. This is an
Okay,
approach to
okay, okay.
training where we constrain the athletes or constrain the actors
Hmm.
to doing specific things that create the skill.
Hmm.
But the central thing, or there's actually three central things I think are very important and easy to talk about when we talk about an ecological approach to skill acquisition or the constraints-led approach. It's one is everything is contextually dependent and relevant. So context is everything. We have to keep as much of the context together as
Hmm.
possible. The
Okay.
second is as variation, the acceptance of variation, both in application of the things we do and then the variation present in the environment in which we're acting. And the third is a novel adaptation to novelty. And so again, the context helps us develop variability. Exposure to variability inoculates us to novelty. And so the constraints-led approach and the ecological approach take all this into consideration when they design practices. Um, and
So,
so we're just trying to take those component parts or those relationships into
okay, for
designing practice.
now, I want you to say all that again, but I can really like bro science, bro talk, gym talk terms, please go back slow.
Yes.
Okay. So we have constraints. Okay. You're limited in what you're allowed to do.
Correct. So constraint is just something that limits an option. So
Okay.
let's say, for example, we play a game where I start underneath your elbows in the mount.
Okay.
I'm constrained to stay under those elbows. I can lose one, but I can't lose both. So I can
Okay.
put any piece of my body underneath your elbows so it can never touch. And I'm
Right.
going to try to hold you down as long as I can, stay under both your elbows or at least one of your elbows as long as possible,
Hmm.
with no win condition. Okay, the bottom player's job is to bring the elbows into the body and have nothing underneath him. That is a
Hmm.
constraint. So all the actions both players are taking are going to be relative to the demands of that task, both stay under elbows and the other get rid of people under our elbows. That relationship and us acting towards that is going to affect the behavior that comes out.
Okay. Then you said variability.
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 So
He's exploring now. He's doing it every which way he thinks is makes sense. Is that
for sure.
what you mean?
So yes, variability is interesting. So one is like the obvious variability, like we can do it many different ways. So every time those two players play that game and switch top to bottom, we're going to see variation. We're going to see different ways that both players solve the problem over and over and over again. We're going to see a lot of little things change, right? Um, but what's interesting is variation only matters if it's functional. So no matter how many different ways we will see both players solve the problem, the variation is only as important as it is effective. So if
Right.
someone does something that makes them fail, then that variation will start to be weeded out as a possible solution to the problem.
Mhm.
What's also interesting about variation is when we see elite movers solve problems, even if it's a, like, let's say there's a consistent movement like a punch, we don't see the same punch being thrown twice ever. There's so much variation in how the arms, hips, knees, head, shoulders move each time that punch is thrown. And variation goes up as skill goes up.
Mhm.
So variation is critical.
And the last is novelty, correct?
Novelty. So that's what the performance environment is. So let's imagine that we take the competitive exchange as the maximum that we're guiding our student towards. A person we don't know on a day that's not of our choice, and we have no idea how we're going to feel about it or how we're going to interact. That's every performance context you've ever heard of. You got to go in there and you got to figure that shit out in real time and hope the things that you do beat the things that he does.
Mhm.
And the only way that we can do that in variation allows us to adapt. So let's say we solve the problem of dodging a punch and punching back. We solved that problem 100 different ways. We're going to be more prepared for punches that are thrown at us based on the variation we've been exposed to historically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And again, the strength of that variation is directly correlated with the context in which we developed it. So can
So
you now see how those three things are important?
yeah, yeah, I do. But so you context is everything.
Context, variation, and novelty are everything.
Do you have an instructional on games or like or CLA, I mean?
I mean, I got a lot of stuff, a lot of free stuff on my YouTube, and I got a lot of free stuff on
Okay.
my IG. We just put out our first like purchase instructionals, like $50, just a way we can organize practice for standing, learning how, and it was all
Hmm.
centered around the single leg and the conditions that let it happen, and then how to use the connection of the single leg to destabilize our partner towards the mat. Um, we're going to put another one out on entanglements and heel hooks specifically in about a week or so. And so we're trying to enter the instructional market by offering a new way to consume instructional material that's not just a collection of facts, but a way you could use knowledge and apply it directly to practice design.
I love it, man. Well, look, like every true theory, you have to make a prediction now. We got to be able to predict what's going to happen in the future. I mean, look, if I had to take a stab at it, I would think that this approach is going to work for some and not for all.
Well, okay, why? Why won't it work for all? What's special about this approach that makes it exclusive?
And in all honesty, okay, because I've been in the gym for countless hours every day for 20 plus years, okay? And I've had the privilege to work with some of the best fighters ever. Again, I'm telling you, like I've been with the best trainers, the best fighters. Like I've seen so much varied variety in training methods. Okay, so I really believe there's more than one way to get to the top. But let's say I had two fighters in the practice room, fighter A and fighter B. Okay,
Okay.
fighter A and fighter B, and they're playing games. They're playing games like you're saying, elbows underneath, etc. The more athletic guys are gonna dominate because I'm giving them no secrets. I'm not telling them the secrets of how to keep the elbow. I'm not giving them a certain details. Now, the cerebral guys, in my opinion, if I give them instruction, they do better than if I just make them play games. Like the athletic guys will do really well in your system. The cerebral guys, they need the nuance, they need the explain, they need to understand how the system works. If the guy does this, I do that. If the guy does that, I do. They have the bandwidth. So, some guys are like this. Like I'll give you for instance, like me and George were very different athletes. Okay, he was much more athletic than me,
Yeah.
but I was really good with if he does this, I need to go here. If he does that, like I was a computer. You know, like I believed in the algorithm. And John used to teach algorithmically, and that's why George and me we made such a great duo. He was a really good athlete, and I had the algorithm memorized. I knew it very well. I understood the system where he was supposed to go, when and where. I thought about it all the time. So for me, I feel like the athletes, and I believe it ultimately. I personally, I believe in merging both methods. Okay, so you break down the system, you drill it, and then okay, you go out in the real world and you do it live, and the context matters. I agree with merging both. Okay, but if we take away one and we have this piece, only the in context live combative training, I think that the better athletes will have a huge advantage. Because
It's
the
what's called,
difference between me and George, the difference between me and George is I know that physics is on my side if I'm in this position here. And if I'm not in this position here, he's going to crush me with his strength.
well, I just had a fun thought experiment, and then we can go
Yeah.
back to those
Yeah.
nuances. So
Please
let's
do.
say you and George get in the octagon on a random Saturday, and you fight to whoever wins. Truly, you and him.
Yeah.
Out of 10 times, how many times do you win?
Listen, I haven't. Look, he's bigger than. Are we talking about we're the same
No,
size?
no, no, yeah, just that you two as people. And I'll talk about why I'm asking you this.
Well, I'll tell you something. If I don't follow the rules, if I don't have a well, I hate to use me and him because it's gonna sound crazy, but he's the guy we all trained. We put our time and energy. But when we were younger and we used to spar, our rounds were they're very
You were
competitive.
in development, people are much more competitive. But right now, you guys jumped in the cage right now. 10 out of 10 times, who
Well,
wins?
he's the former world champion. I mean, he'll crush anybody in the world.
Yeah. So, like, my point is to say that the athlete always beats the thinker. And I mean that if the
Mhm.
capacities are being equalized. So if I am big, strong, fast, and mean, and you're smart, unless I have some way to manipulate that novelty, you're gonna get train wrecked,
Well,
buddy. Right?
I wouldn't agree with that to be honest with you, because the
So
thing is,
out of 10 times,
right?
could you beat his athleticism with
Well,
your
let's say it's
thinking?
not. Let's take it out for me and George because that's going to create a bunch of people are going to clip this and they're going to make a whole nuance. But okay, let's talk about if there's an intellectual, a guy who understands the system and a guy who doesn't understand the system, but he's really strong.
Okay.
It's a very even fight, in my opinion. Could go
Okay.
either
So
way.
you
Five out of
yeah.
five. 5 out of 5. If I can give it to you that way, I'll give it to you five
Okay.
out of five. To be honest with you,
Okay. So
totally.
all I was going to make a point is
Especially,
capacity.
sorry, Greg. Especially if there's more time. The more time you give me, eventually the intellectual guy wins.
Sure. So capacity has an effect on skill. So people that are big,
Of
fast,
course,
mean, aggressive, their skills are going to be expressed that way. And
of
if
course.
you're, and again, I don't know what level, like, I guess being intelligent or cerebral have an effect on skill, but I know that it does. Maybe it makes us more sensitive to the information that's being present and why it's being present, and maybe that enhancing our perceptive window makes us see more and more opportunities. Maybe I don't know, but maybe that capacity has a certain level of effectiveness against an athletic player. But it'd be hard to say. But either way, high levels of capacity affect skill. So the higher level of
Of course,
capacity
of
you
course.
have in something,
Yeah.
excuse me,
No, I'm saying, of course, I totally agree with you.
the higher your capacity, the more effective skill you're going to have. If you're able to transfer that capacity into skilled behavior.
But Greg, you're a very smart guy. You're a very intelligent guy. You know that your intelligence has served you well on the mats. Of course, you
Well, and
understand. The
to a degree,
understanding makes a big difference.
for
Understanding
sure. I
makes.
mean, I know more about jujitsu than I can perform in jujitsu.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Yeah,
So knowledge, facts, these things, this memory that we store in our head doesn't necessarily translate to skill, doesn't necessarily transfer to skill. We like to say it does. We like to imagine that it's the memorization of systems and these mind maps and blah, 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 blah. But again, it's only if you're able to use that to create novelty in your opponent's world and they're not able to adapt that novelty that will that have an effect.
well, I think it
And
all
what's
matters, right?
an
Strength
example would,
matters.
well, it truly, it does all matter. I'm just trying to
Hmm.
play the game that you
Right.
said. You have the cerebral guy and you have the athlete guy.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what's
yeah.
the difference? They're
Yeah,
just
but
capacities that we can use to express skill differently.
I think it's 5 out of 5. Like the intellectual guy beats the athletic guy 5 times out of 5 if he has as much intellect as he has physical capacity.
And
But
if we can say
if
that,
you
it's
I'm
a
sorry.
fun thought experiment.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said, if we can say that, I mean, it's a fun thought experiment, but
Yeah,
I
right,
think
right, right.
it's really
We'd
hard.
have to test it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, I could point out so many fights where the guy used a very intelligent move to win the fight at the right
Cool.
time, right place, and
I mean,
he didn't have the look. I'll give you for instance. Okay, my brother just fought Jose Aldo, and Jose Aldo came in 8 pounds overweight, 8 pounds after my brother had made weight. You know, Jose Aldo, I'll tell you something, is bigger, stronger than my brother, much more explosive. It was a very close fight. My brother ended up on top of him, just elbowing him, and he took the last round and he won the fight. He did things that were smarter because he was outgunned. He was outsized. Aldo has a longer reach. He's faster. Aldo's faster. Aldo has more experience. But in the end, Aldo spent more energy and was completely gassed by the end of the fight that he just laid on his back for the last 3 minutes. And efficiency won the day in that fight. And I could point you to 100 other fights, you know.
Yeah,
But George also, why he was so special is because he was incredibly physical and also
yeah.
incredibly intelligent guy as well.
Yeah, so but again, I mean, that's all good, and I agree that capacity colors skill. I don't disagree with that in any way, shape,
Hmm.
or form. But I don't know what that has to do with an ecological approach or not, or live training or drilling.
Oh, because
There's no correlation.
what I was saying earlier is that if I don't whisper the secrets to my fighters, because let's say I have a room full of fighters, okay?
Yeah,
50 of them are intellectuals,
yeah.
50% of them are brutes, okay? When I give instructions and I explain the system, the intellectuals are getting a lot more from that than the brutes.
Well, so yeah, that's exactly right. Let's imagine that instruction is your only intervention. People who can use that, and let's say there's some mental capacity that drives skill in that certain
Right.
environment, then yeah, you're going to be a more effective coach if that's your only intervention. But imagine if you could whisper the secret to the brute, just like you could whisper the secret to the intellectual, and you knew exactly which language both of them spoke. This would be a more effective way to coach.
But
So it's
sorry, what I was trying to get to is that they get more from the instruction, the theory, that the demonstration than the brutes. But the brutes will get more out of let's get in these positions and grind and or like have these constraints. They're going to get more out of that part than the intellectuals, is what I'm trying to
well, we
say.
don't really know. So learning is
I'm
non-linear.
assuming, I'm
Yeah,
theorizing
well, I
from my
mean,
years of
because
experience, is what I'm trying to
so
say.
the whole thing about this model that we're talking about of this ecological approach, this constraints led approach, whatever, is that it's what's called a nonlinear model. So the idea is that we don't know the input output ratio. So all the component parts that make up an individual and their environment are so numerous, it's hard to say what causes what. So
Right.
let's say we have a guy who's a brute, or he's big, strong, athletic guy with low intellect. We don't know.
You just described half my practice room.
Well, I understand sport is probably most of the people you interact with, but
No,
um,
I'm just kidding.
no, no, I'm not. There's actually a thing I read one time that there's actually a positive correlation with low intelligence and high implicit response. So,
Hmm.
like people who respond more implicitly and tend to be a little more athletic tend to be a little lower on the intellectual
Yeah,
spectrum.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But either
that's.
way,
I
that's
mean, that's the classic thing, right? That jock is dumb and the nerdy
yeah.
guy is wimpy, but he's super smart, right?
Yeah, I mean, because think about it, a nerdy guy spends all his time reading books and typing on the computer, and he's not throwing rocks at his buddies. The guy who's running
Right.
around like clubbing his friends, he's getting big. He's throwing his friends around. So it's like, is it
Hmm.
really that there's a nerd or a jock, or do we just get good at
But
what we do?
there's actually, I mean, I don't want to get too far into this because it's very controversial, but higher testosterone levels also correlate with lower intelligence.
Yeah, sure. I
Mm.
mean, I'm
Natural higher testosterone
yeah,
levels.
I'm just going to believe you. I don't know, but so no, either way, I mean, I think that we have to know what's going to affect the athlete. So
Right.
what interventions are going to cause the change? And I don't think we have there. I don't think there's one answer that fits all. I think being able to adapt to your athlete is part of the process.
Hmm. Yeah,
But I
I
think
agree with you.
the three things we mentioned: high context, high variation, and preparing for novelty. I don't think nobody does poor in that environment because I think that's at its base the three most important things that can't be removed from practice.
Okay, well, also I want to ask you, look, because you grew up with drilling, and now you have a new generation of athletes that you're breeding now, and you feel like you're noticing that they're learning at a faster rate than the way you did it.
Yes, absolutely. And not just learning at a faster rate, but they're more adaptable. So it's the novelty thing. Like their response to novel situations is incredible.
Really?
Their ability to vary what they do and vary how they solve problems is incredible. They can do more in shorter times and do more in the face of novelty and
Is that your
variation.
younger athletes or is it for everybody?
Uh, Everybody, but of course, and I really, the younger athletes are special. They have more time.
Hmm.
They don't have as many limiting factors like, oh, my elbow hurts, my knee hurts, or my kids, whatever. They have more time to really engage with their practice. And I think that affects learning. But yeah,
Well, sometimes I watch my sons, and the thing is, kids, I used to have like a rule of three. I only tell them three things. I let them like do a situation, but I give them minimal instruction and ask the parents, don't bombard them with instructions. Just like kind of let them have those three things to focus on. Because if you give them four, I feel like it creates confusion and some I train my kids like that, And I'll tell you something. Sometimes I would watch them roll, and I would see them do stuff I never taught them.
oh, for sure. Because I mean, what they do is relative to what the environment affords. So, your kids have a certain capacity or a certain ability to act out in the world. And as they act out and play, opportunities are afforded them. So things they can do, and they will respond to that in real time. And this is how this is how all behaviors pretty much start to emerge.
Right. And I agree. There's an amount, if you give them too much instruction, you kind of like, you kill their creativity. I've noticed
Yeah.
that,
No, you
I've,
take the bounds of what's possible and you shrink it. If you
right.
shrink the bounds of what's possible, you're going to get less.
Yeah. That's why I'm always telling my fighters, look, I'm not gonna be there on if I'm not there on fight night, you should still beat the guy. Sometimes I can't go to every fight, and they're like, oh, I need you there. I'm like, dude, you already know how to fight. Like, I don't have to be there. You should know every answer to whatever the guy poses on you. If I trained you well, you should be able to win. Now, I'll be honest with you. I also agree that it's better to have your coach with you because your coach can remind you, he can give you cues, he can remind you of how the system works. I'm a big believer in John Danaher's method. He has a systematic approach. And if the fight goes in this position, in this direction, we should stay on this course. Okay. Let's say, for instance, I'll give you a for instance. Let's say you're fighting a Randy Couture. He's incredible if he gets you in an underhook. Like, he's not the best boxer, but if he grabs you in an underhook, it's going to take a lot of time and energy to break free. And he can zap your energy. So a good game plan against a guy like that is like how Machida fought him. Machida fought him beautifully. He never once allowed a clinch. He stayed out of his range. It was premeditated, obviously. He went in there and dismantled Randy Couture. Why? Because Randy Couture had a kill switch. If you don't let him grab you, he's not a good boxer. If
For
he
sure.
grabs you, if he grabs you for a prolonged period of time, he'll bring you down to his level of boxing. Like, he's not
Yeah.
he's not
So
the best boxer.
well, this is the manipulation of novelty. So let's say an athlete has a high amount of skill in a specific situation, and you deny those conditions that
Yeah.
they'll need to enact their skill. You put them in a novel state. And it's very hard for a person to adapt to too much novelty. So, for example, if he can't grip up and Machida can just pop, 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 he has no response to that. He has no way to solve that problem. Probably going to lose the fight.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I mean, there is some like, you would have some strategy, right? Let's say you're prepping a guy for somebody who's a great leg locker,
Well, well,
right?
yes, there's always strategy that goes into it, but we have to first create the skill in the athlete in order for them to use it as an adaptive
You're
mechanism
going to
to.
create a game for him to avoid that situation.
Well, it depends if they can. So, it would be a mistake. Let's imagine that I had 6 weeks to prepare for somebody, and they're like, "Oh, this person is so good at that thing." I might not want to even engage with what they're good at. I might want to think of, how can we use the skill that I have to fight the skill that they have versus like
Mhm.
trying to change my athlete, right? So rather than try to create something new in 6 weeks, we just prepare them for imposing their current skill in the face of the thing that they might face, like a great leg locker or something. So maybe we do a lot of training where he's getting his legs bound up as he's like breaking connections, just punching the guy in the face while he's on his back, and we just give them a lot of exposure to the problems that we think they're going to solve or they're going to have to face at the end of the 6 weeks.
Okay, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever read the book Blackbox Thinking? So, Greg, listen, I got this book. It's called Blackbox Thinking. It's a phenomenal book. Okay, it talks about. It's written by a journalist. Okay, I love anything that's written well. It doesn't matter to me who writes it, but this is a brilliantly written book. Okay, it talks about how he compares basically the medical industry with the aviation industry. The aviation industry far superior in their thinking method. That's why he calls it black box thinking. When a plane crashes, they find a black box. They find how it happened, why it crashed. They get to the bottom of it. They learn. They adapt from mistakes, errors in the past. It's a bottoms up approach, which is similar to your approach, learning by experience, testing things out, trying it out, and then learning. And it's a phenomenal book. I'm going to send you a copy of this as a gift
Okay.
and as a thank you, for being on
All
the
right.
podcast today.
All
I
right.
really, really appreciate you.
Yeah,
I wish
man.
we could have done it a little bit longer, but I can't thank you enough for your time and energy. And I'm sure we're going to need a second podcast in the future. And I wanted to reiterate, all the guys who trained with you, they've told me nothing but great things. So I hope one day we get a chance to work out together. I would love to be in the practice room with you one day and you could put me through the games. You said you're releasing a video shortly.
Yeah.
What do you know the title? Do you know the working
Um,
title?
no, so typically we actually use a website called Thinkific, and we just put it on there. So it's going to be we title our stuff standing, guarded, or pinned. So it's going to be guarded engagement. That's what we call it. And so it's going to be specific to entangling and finishing with heel hooks. Games created to develop those skills. So that's what we're going to be
Amazing.
putting up soon.
I'm
Real
gonna
quick for us.
Yes, go
couple
ahead.
small things real quick before you
Yes.
go. So
Yes.
one, I would definitely love to do is again. I think out of all the people who don't really understand this and are approaching it, I think you're the most level-headed out of anyone I've spoken to on your side of
Thank you.
things. So
Thank
I think
you.
it'd be easy for us to have a nice fluid conversation. But I think we can get into more specifics next time. Maybe if you wrote some stuff down that you're very curious about, and we
Sure.
could get into the nuances of it, and I can explain things more clearly. I think that would be great. And the other thing is, I travel a lot to do seminars. If you're ever willing to have me at your school,
Of course.
I would love to come up and run something for you guys.
Of course. When would you be available? Tell me the
Uh,
time.
so, dude, I don't know if you can see on the camera, but I actually ruptured my bicep right
Oh,
here.
really?
Yeah, so
That
I
hurts.
have
That's
to.
painful. That's
It
painful.
sucks,
That's a painful injury.
and it was a stupid injury too. So,
Wow.
anyway, I got a couple of things coming up. I'm traveling to Kazakhstan for AIGA. I'm the coach of the American Mystics team on CJI, and I got to get this bicep fixed. So
Okay.
depending on how all that goes, will depend on my availability. But
Well, listen, you tell me the date and we're gonna make it happen. I would love to have you down.
fantastic,
It
man.
would be a
Great,
pleasure.
great, cool, man.
Okay, man. So listen, I know we're running short on time, so I'm gonna give you one last big thank you very much for showing up on this podcast. I really highly appreciate it. And I'm gonna be sending you this book, so you're gonna send me your address. I'm gonna put whatever you want me to put in the description for people to contact you, to find you, your materials online. So please make sure, for those of you listening who want to see more of Greg's system, check the description. It's gonna be down there. And Greg, I'm gonna send you this book. I think you're gonna love it. Thank you very
All right.
much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for awesome. Appreciate it, man.